Hi, this is Orange County Executive Steve Neuhaus. Thank you for joining us for January 2023's NeuCAST, our podcast. We have an awesome guest, my friend Alan Mack. Alan, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for
Alan is a retired Army helicopter pilot, flew with the Special Forces, was shot down in Afghanistan by Al Qaeda. Was also part of the Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor. All these exciting stories. He's also the author of this great book, Razor 3, where he talks about not only his experiences in the Army, but also personal struggles. So really awesome, interesting guy. He happens to now work with me, and he's a Deputy Commissioner of Emergency Management for Orange County. So Alan, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So September 11th happens, you're training, and then you, like every other military person at the time, is watching this on TV and saying, oh boy.
Yeah. So I turn on the TV and there's one of the World Trade Center buildings burning.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, this is going to be bad. And I remembered that, what was it, like in the 20s or something, an airplane had hit the Empire State Building. And I thought, oh, someone's in trouble, And I was like, oh, that's a big hole though. That can't be a little Cessna. That's a big plane. And so I get some coffee and I'm watching it, and all of a sudden, in comes the next one. It's like, oh, we are under attack. That's not an accident.
So when do you leave the country with the order saying, here's what we're doing, you're going to go help the Northern Alliance or set up a U.S. footprint in Afghanistan?
Well, at that stage of the game, our mission was personnel recovery. So there was no what's called the unconventional warfare campaign that became later. We didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
That was secret. And so what we were doing is we would rescue any downed pilots
okay.
that were bombing the Taliban. And why they were bombing them really was to soften it up so that we could fly in to bring these special forces team, but we didn't know that yet. It was all very compartmentalized, and it was still being worked.
Yeah.
But so September 11th happens, and our first infill into Afghanistan from the country of Uzbekistan was October 19th.
Yeah.
So pretty quick after it. So the bombing campaign obviously started about 2 weeks prior to that.
So you're living in Uzbekistan, and then you start flying missions into Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And at that point, from a rescue training mission that you were supposed to go in, you're dropping off Special Forces.
Yeah. So, roughly 2 weeks into the bombing campaign, the Special Forces 5th Group Commander, Colonel Mulholland at the time, shows up. He assumes command of the task force that we're in, Task Force Dagger, and then they read us onto the program. It's like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take guys in. And the interesting thing with this is the mountains are so big there and the distances so far, you had to air refuel on the way in and on the way out, which is considered a no-no back then. You always wanted to do just one way for redundancy and some things. But the height of the mountains, if we hadn't trained up for the Andes Mountains,
you wouldn't have been ready.
We wouldn't have been as ready as we were, because we were used to supplemental oxygen, the power requirements, and the limitations. In most places, you can I've had 90 guys in the back of a Chinook in Iraq, 90 Rangers. Over there, I could carry 12 guys, for the distances that we had to go. And everybody's like, well, why can't you carry more? Well, because we're going 20,000 feet.
Let's go into March 2002 and the Battle of Takagar. So you're in Afghanistan for a couple months, and you're dropping people in, and you get on to this mission to get bin Laden. That's what really the whole goal was, to get the Taliban out of power, beat Al Qaeda, and number one, capture or kill Osama bin Laden.
Right. And so, the idea, there were two task forces, Dagger and Sword. Sword was off an aircraft carrier down south, and we were up north in Uzbekistan. So the idea was to make the Taliban fall so that we could get at bin Laden, who was in the Tora Bora Mountains. So we did that. They collapsed very quickly after taking Mazar-e Sharif, which is an airfield, a town to the north. So we moved down to Bagram Air Base, right? It was now, everybody knows about it from the whole fall of Kabul.
Yeah.
But we're down there, and the idea is to go get bin Laden. There's a bombing campaign that goes on, and then there's a Delta team that goes after him. They actually are within small arms range, like rifle range of him, and they are going to kill him. And the guys that brought him in, the Afghans that brought him in, didn't realize they were on a kill mission. And they pointed their AK-47s at the Delta guys in a little Mexican standoff. And it's like, all right, you shoot him, we shoot you. and the whole team would have been wiped out. And they're like, all right, we'll just withdraw. We know where he is. We won't bomb him. Unfortunately,
has that been publicized? That story?
Yep.
Okay.
There's the Delta team commander who's died of cancer. A guy named Tom Greer wrote a book about that as a pen name of Dalton Fury.
Yeah.
And he took a lot of heat for that. It didn't run through the Pentagon security review, and he got a lot of trouble for it. But
so they had him there, and they could have got him, and
right.
our allies said no.
Right. And then there was a ceasefire because they thought we killed him a couple days later. He was injured seriously, but then he came off the radio, and that's because he was injured.
Yeah.
And the CENTCOM, the Central Command, decided to stop the bombing campaign. Well, he's dead. We'll leave him alone. We'll just watch. And if he comes back up, we'll go after him. Well, by then he slipped into Pakistan, and that was that.
But so by the time you're shot down, and we're going to get into that in a second, he's in Pakistan already.
Yep.
Okay.
Right. And we, they eventually killed him in Pakistan. We always knew he was in Pakistan. Our community. You just didn't know where. If you were to lay out a map and put your hand on it, we knew he was within.
In the mountain
an area
somewhere,
of that.
or no.
You just got to figure out where he is. But
so you get called to this other mission,
right, which is Operation Anaconda, which is actually a conventional forces mission. Right, it's 82nd and the 101st, and we have no part in it, except for the fact that it's now believed that Bin Laden and his number 2, Zawahiri, are in that
area,
Objective Remington area, which is near Takur,
which is all in Afghanistan.
Right.
For people listening. But your community and the special forces, in your opinion, always thought that he had already been left, but whatever.
Right.
They're telling you they think he's here.
Right.
So now you guys get sucked into this mission.
And so what they need is there's 2 components to the mission. It's called the hammer and the anvil, right? So the anvil is the mountains surrounding the valley, and they have what you call high-speed avenue of approach, or roads. Right? Yeah. And so the idea is that if Bin Laden or Zawahiri or both of them are there and we start this campaign, they'll try to flee. And if they do, there'll be special forces troops. And these are coalition forces. The Germans, the Netherlands, the Canadians, all this stuff are up in the mountains, and they're overlooking all these roads, and they'll call bombs in on these things or Apache gunships, and so we get tasked with that job, putting the guys in the mountains.
Yeah.
Right? And my job as the senior flight lead of the bunch is if Bin Laden or Zawahiri show up, I'm the flight lead that's going to go get them. So I have a group of SEALs from Dam Neck assigned to me, and my job is to not do anything, just hang out and wait. And if Zawahiri shows up, yeah. So SEAL Team 6, and that was our role. Unfortunately. So here's what happens, right? So you get that anvil, and then the hammer is General Zia's force. It's Afghans, led by Special Forces. And they're going to come down, and they're going to drive the bad guys toward the mountains for the coalition forces on top of the hills to call in, right? Fire on them. Except what happens is they have an unfortunate fratricide event. An AC-130 gunship misidentifies and kills the lead element, which is the American Green Berets, a guy named Harriman. And they kill him, the Afghans run. They're like, well, if they killed the Americans, what chance do we have? So the hammer never happens. And
so nothing's pushing them.
Nothing's pushing them. They're just happy in a terrain feature called the Whale. Right? It looks like a whale from the air. And they fought battles against the Soviets, so the fighting positions are already there. The overall mission was delayed 2 weeks for weather. And
word got out.
Word got out because
to the bad guys.
We are very chivalrous, right? And it's considered good form to tell everybody we're going to come, right? In other words, they went around door to door telling the NGOs, right, the non-governmental organizations.
You might want to leave here.
Yeah,
got it.
We got something going on.
So it wasn't meant to be like there was an intelligence leak. It was that we were trying to tell the friendly people that were there.
It's like the UN, the Red Cross, Red Crescent. It's like, hey guys, you might want to be here. Well, unfortunately, they're very trustworthy, they're telling everybody,
something's going down.
Yeah. And so when the 101st and the 82nd Airborne come in there in their Chinooks, all of the potential landing zones are already scoped out with range cards and mortar coordinates.
From the enemy.
So the enemy is firing very accurate mortar fire on the troops when they go in. So they can't move at all. So somebody decides, you know, we need to get a better view, and the only way we can do that is get to the top of this mountain called Tarkar Gar, which is the biggest key terrain feature in the valley. We didn't have anybody on because, you know, if the hammer and the anvil worked, you wouldn't need that.
Yeah, but now you have to change plans.
Right. So they decide, well, we don't have any troops. Oh wait, Bin Laden's not here. Let's use the SEALs that we're going to do the Bin Laden attack. Right. So that's me and the SEALs. So mission is we're going to go take these guys to the top of this mountain. Actually, the plan was to take them to the base of the mountain. They would walk up under the cover of darkness. And there were delays. B-52 strikes kept turning us back, and there's a whole long litany of delays. But the point is we eventually have to take them to the top of the mountain. And when we did that, the enemy was there. You know, key terrain is key terrain for a reason.
Yeah.
And it was also key terrain for the enemy. And we get up there. They're just about to get out. And the short of it is we take an RPG to the side of the aircraft, and about 50 bullet holes in the aircraft later on, we counted. Losing, you know, all the electronics, the electricity itself, and some hydraulic systems, which ended up with us at about 10 miles away on the base of the valley.
So you crashed 10 miles down.
Yeah.
And one of the SEALs, Petty Officer Roberts, falls out the back and ends up dying in small arms combat with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, whoever's up there with
and it was Al-Qaeda up there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, he falls out as we come off the mountain, and, you know, there's a lot more detail to it than that, but it's its own story, really. And so my wingman comes to rescue us, and because we were separated.
Yeah.
And so I was on the ground about 45 minutes, and the SEALs were like, we got to get back up the hill. Unfortunately, they couldn't take all of us up there in the aircraft because of performance, because of how heavy the aircraft would be. So they take us back to a forward operating base in Gardez, which is, you know, 4-minute flight. We drop off, the SEALs drop off their extended weather gear, and they go right back up. And that aircraft ends up being shot down as well, but not
as bad.
As well. No, his was, his was just as bad. But he ends up back at Gardez with the SEALs on top of the mountain. So in this time frame, you end up with 2 medals of honor, one to John Chapman from the Air Force and one to Britt Slabinski from the Navy SEALs. So.
Yeah, and it is a story in itself, because I know you've told me a number of aspects of it in different pieces and the amount of people that were killed on it and the damage. So you're shot down, and then the rest of your career going into the lone survivor, what you see about Marcus Luttrell, the lone SEAL after all this mission. There's a Chinook that's shot down with a rescue crew on it. Now, you were in Afghanistan when that happened, or no?
I was. So the lone survivor mission, which was actually Operation Red Wings, was a Marine Corps mission. So once again, we weren't really part of it until they decided they needed eyes on the objective before the assault. So what that means is you got to have somebody in the mountains looking down into the valley at a guy named Ahmad Shah, and they're going to discern pattern of life, right, and figure out, you know, who's moving around the village and when, and if they can figure out, you know, they know what he looks like, so they're going to see if they can figure out what building he's in out of the like 5 or 6 buildings. So when the helicopters do come in with the Marines, if people run out of that building, they know to say, hey, you know,
that's the place.
That's the way you got to go, or he just left,
you
know, kind of thing. The problem is you can't get to the top of a mountain looking over a valley without being heard. Right? It's just going to happen. We've had experience of this. So the SEALs knew it, and it was a 4-man team, Marcus Luttrell being the lone survivor of them. But they're up there, and the next morning they're compromised, and we launch what's called the Quick Reaction Force, the QRF, which is SEALs out of their unit, and in our helicopter. What's interesting to me is that I was supposed to be the QRF. Like you'd have it for a week at a time, and we did a changeover at 10 a.m. Zulu, I think it was.
The day before?
Well, it was that day, right? So we didn't know this was all going to happen. So I was not part of Red Wings at all. I was the Quick Reaction Force because
somebody needs you. Well, you could have went to anybody.
Right, but the reason we did is because we had 9 aircraft there, 9 Chinooks, 2 of them being MH-47 Echoes, right, which is the version of aircraft that I flew. the other ones were all MH-47 Deltas, which weren't as sophisticated. Like they couldn't do as much, but they were lighter, so they could carry more troops.
Yeah.
So they assigned them to Red Wings, and that's why I switched over to Quick Reaction Force, so they could use those aircraft for the main mission. So I was, once again, not supposed to be part of that. So the outgoing QRF decides they're already up.
Yeah.
They're going to go, right? And so I walk into the Tactical Operations Center with a cup of coffee, and I sit down and I'm looking at all the monitors up on the wall with the colonel. I'm like, oh, what's going on, sir? He's like, oh, we had to launch the QRF. I'm the QRF right now. He's like, well, the Major Reich was already up, so they went. And obviously, they were already there. So they were just approaching as I came in, so they definitely would have with a quicker choice. But
if they had, at that point, the Quick Reaction Force is two of these,
right.
and the Apaches were somewhere else on another mission, they usually escort them in. Would that have made a difference?
No. And the reason being is that there really was nowhere to land. There was a lot of logging up there, so trees were down in a couple of areas. So they were going to do what's called fast rope. So they come to an 80-foot hover, and these ropes come out, and the ropes are about this big around, like a old-fashioned fire pole. And they slide down, right? And as they did that, they came to the hover. A guy was in the woods with a rocket-propelled grenade, and he just shot right up into the aft transmission area, and the aircraft didn't explode outright, but it limped away, and then these two rotors became disengaged, and they ended up hitting each other, and the aircraft came apart and all over the side of the mountain, and killing everybody. So had the Apaches been there, they wouldn't have seen the guy, and they still would have shot down the Chinook, because that's the target. So just
a lucky shot from the bad guy.
And a well-placed shot, really. And so the gunships, typically in these missions, are more of a revenge weapon, or they're there if you can survive the crash, like in my case, they can protect you, but they really can't protect the airframe. So
the mission after that becomes a recovery mission over the next few weeks to recover the remains of not only the air crew and the SEALs that were in that helicopter, but the 3 members of the 4-man team that Luttrell was running on, and a rescue mission to get him, which happened about a week or so later too.
Right. And it's people ask me, what the the most rewarding mission, would be maybe the horse soldier infill, because that was, or maybe that was the most exciting. And then the most rewarding was a hostage rescue I did in Iraq. The most difficult was this mission right here, to rescue Marcus Luttrell, because the enemy knew where we had to go, right? And there was like 3 ways into the mountains, and the tops of the mountains were covered in clouds, so you really couldn't fly over those. 2 of the valleys were clear, and the third one, the only aircraft that could fly through it were the ones that I was flying, the Echoes, but there was only 2 of us. And I would lead a flight of, 5 or 6 Delta models with my Echoes, so I had to go with their limitations. It was very tough, very difficult.
So after that, you have a number of other missions, Iraq, Afghanistan in full swing. You did tours in both countries.
Right.
And during the Bin Laden raid, you're back home. Where are you?
I'm back home during Neptune Spear.
Yeah.
So it's funny because all of us knew, like I said, we kind of knew where he was.
Yeah.
And nobody ever wanted to leave Afghanistan.
Until you got him.
Because it's like, all right, we're gonna get him this time, right?
Yeah.
We're talking almost 10 years of that, and it's like you didn't want to leave. And the one guy that used to replace me all the time, I didn't want him to be the guy to get him, and he's the guy that got him.
Yeah.
I left.
He's got the bragging rights.
Thing. Yeah, he's got the bragging rights.
You after September 11th, when did you? Because I met you in 2014.
14, I think.
So you had now left the special operations and now went to your cushy retirement job as flying helicopters here in Orange County at West Point.
Yeah.
When did you leave the SOAR?
All right, so I left there 2012, I guess, to go fly the mighty Lakota, the UH-72, which
is over here.
Which here you can see is much larger than the Chinook. These are obviously not to scale, but the mighty Lakota, I joke, gives you everything you want, but just barely.
Which I don't know, can I say I've flown with you on that?
Yeah.
Which was a pretty cool helicopter.
Yeah.
So you're flying for West Point. I haven't read your book because the books that I've now purchased through my family have went to my family members who have not given them back and passed them to other people in my family. However, I've gotten a lot of reviews from our friends, and everybody said it was a great book. And this came out a couple months ago. And even like Alan Seidman, who runs the construction contractors in the Hudson Valley, recently told me you can't read that without having a tear in your eye. You have a number of things that went on in your life at the time. You're front and center in crazy missions, the best special operations or exciting missions around the world. You have two sons, and you have a wife at the time who suffers addiction issues and then eventually passes away. So your book is about, it's called The Night Stalkers Wars, which is what the SOAR are called, Night Stalkers. And your call sign was Razor 3. But you had a lot of personal sacrifice and suffering during that time.
Right. Well, to sum it up really is that, I mean, now we have this opioid addiction, right? Prescription meds and stuff. And that was her problem, is when I was shot down in Operation Anaconda, the news broadcast that, 8 people were killed, 2 Chinooks down. And at the time, she thought we had 4 Chinooks there. There was more than that. But she knew as a flight leader that I was
part of this.
I was likely to be
one of the 2 shot down.
Right, and she hadn't heard from me. And she found out later on that I did not call when I had the opportunity. So when I was rescued and I was at the Ford operating base in Gardez, I was with the CIA guys, and they said, hey, this is about to make CNN, you might want to call your family. And I said, I can't, because the people who are dead, their families haven't been notified. Right, and that's the whole thing.
So they're like, oh, your wife's been called. It might be my loved one that died.
Right. So and the problem is they'll figure out.
We were soldiers type of scenario.
So they'll figure out by the process of elimination who is dead before they're notified. So I was like, I can't.
So you don't call her?
I don't call her. She's mad about it. So she kind of turns to alcohol a little bit, and then she had a lot of surgeries like knees and shoulder and stuff like that. And it turns out, after the fact, like years down the line, I find out that she's doctor shopping to get prescription pain medicine. Right. And what happens is methadone was her medicine. And there was a doctor actually at one point that said, hey, you're doctor shopping. And she's like, no, I'm not. And I remember thinking, no, she's not. I was just, the easiest way to describe it is I believed what she wanted me to believe because it was convenient for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do. And she went to rehab a couple of times, and in the end, she ended up
eventually killed him.
Yep, through prescription medications and alcohol.
And how old was she when she died?
She's 45, I think.
Wow.
And that was kind of at the forefront of this opioid epidemic that we're experiencing now. It's just insane.
And you have 2 young boys. Were they in the military by then?
They were. So I've got one. My oldest flies. He's a weapons systems operator, WISO, in the back of F-18s. And the other was a Chinook crew chief in my unit.
And like you, followed in your footsteps as being shot down, and he was shot down 3 times, right, in Iraq?
Yeah, he was shot down 3 times.
And survived. And he's now happy. I know I've seen you have a grandchild with him now too, right?
Yep, so I have 4 grandchildren now, 3 with the oldest and 1 with him.
So you have this great career in the military. You survive wonderful missions, wonderful accolades. You and I meet as we're setting up the first air show in 10 or 20 years at Stewart Airport. Right. And we meet with Brendan Casey, who's a state trooper. I'm a new county executive. You're about to retire. We deal with a couple tragedies, one of them being a plane crash. And you're like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing after retirement. We start going out, doing different things together. We met Petraeus together and other people. And you just start, the opportunity comes up to come work for me in the county in emergency management. So now you hang up this uniform for the military here. And by the way, there's a great picture of you and your boys there with your uniforms. So I think that was at your retirement, maybe.
That was the retirement, yep.
So now you're doing emergency management, and a totally new career for you, or do you feel you're back in the business again, a different mission?
It's pretty similar, actually. So let's back up a little bit. So I left the regiment, came to West Point, I was the commander of the aviation detachment. Flew the general around to D.C. and stuff like that. And
again, like I said, a cushy job.
Started skydiving with the cadets.
Mm-hmm.
These guys were really the turning point. I came up here sort of a broken person, with having lost my wife. I knew that change of venue, and I got that here. And I'd like to say that it gave me enough stress to kind of keep me on my toes, but not so much stress that I had to be bad. Because if I just came here and it was super cushy, I probably wouldn't have done well. But so we did that, and obviously we did the air show, and
at the same time you meet the new love of your life,
right?
Who
so
we make fun of you because you've been on your honeymoon for like 5 years, right?
Right. So I met Patty. She's a New Yorker.
Yeah.
And
Long Islander.
And she's from Long Island, and she moved up here. She was in Putnam County when I met her, and the interesting thing is I did 3 years at West Point. And then the Army said, okay, it's time to move because it is a cushy job.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody else has to fill that job. I'm like, well, where am I going? They said, well, we'll go back to the community, the special operations community. You go to Fort Bragg.
After West Point, what are your options?
Right. And then now I'm at 35 years and some months of service. And Patty agreed that she would go with me to fill this job. I was going to go work for General Cleveland, who is the USASOC commander. And my boys actually called me, my sons, and they said, hey, Dad, you don't want to do that. You're going to take her out of New York, take her to North Carolina, and then you're going to be gone all the time.
Oh, boy.
And I was like, yeah, you know what, you're right. So I decided to retire. And that's obviously, because of the air show, I met several people who had, potential jobs. The Port Authority, Ed Harrison offered me a job.
The air show itself?
The air show, right. Brian offered me a job, Oscar with Avports. And I also had opportunities to fly for Life Flight and Air Methods and such. And then you offered me a position. And I said, well, you said, as I recall, I don't have a helicopter, but I got something you might be interested in. I was like, you got anything to do with emergencies? And you said, as a matter of fact, I do. And, I had all of the required classes, because I did a lot of disaster response stuff when I was in the conventional military.
And we had a relationship between West Point and the county for emergencies anyway. People were missing in the river. Breakneck Ridge was a common place for calls. Yeah. A missing kid in the woods up in I remember in the Deer Park area.
Yep.
So you've already had some type of experience with this military-civilian relationship.
Right. And the neat thing at the hangar there is the New York State Police had an element there with their helicopters. So I got to know those guys really well.
Yeah.
And we actually worked together a couple of times, not on their missions, but on my missions. They would come help us move, sometimes we have these big conferences with generals, the Secretary of the Army, that kind of stuff, and they would help bring it over. So I had a really good relationship with them. And, I tell you, you asked me, if it was different. And the idea, it's a little different. I mean, no one's shooting at me. Well, I'm not.
It's a lot safer.
It is safer in that respect. But it's a lot like the Joint Special Operations Command. Fire, EMS, law enforcement. You have all these. It's like the SEALs, the Air Force, and
who's better, who's the best, personalities.
Right? And it's personalities, right? And that's the one thing that, as a flight lead, you had to be good at was relationships, right? So you've got to meet the senior, the troop leader or the Master Chief, and you got to win them over if they don't already know you, and convince them that you're going to give them the support they need, right? And that's what we do here. Whether it's the mayors or the town supervisors or the police chiefs, or the state police, it's been a lot of fun. A lot of good people.
Most people know you as like a cream puff, happy-go-lucky guy here.
Yeah.
Except for maybe one or two people, which I won't name. But the military people that I've met that worked with you said that you were a real son of a gun. You were a tough guy and always like, and we deal with emergency management. We can't function without EMS. We can't function without fire. So just like the military, you're only as good as everything you got there. Logistics, cargo, bombing, all these different things going on at once. So it's that orchestra that has to function, and if you're missing one section, it's not going to be not going to work.
And you saw that during the pandemic. You know, when we had to, take what little PPE we had and distribute it to the people that needed it, whether it was the hospitals.
And everybody fighting. You have 1%, and you needed 10 times the amount of stuff to go out.
And then dealing with the state and FEMA, and we did it. Obviously we moved everybody here to the building, key personnel, and we were able to function in a way that other elements in the state have come here
Yeah.
to see how we did it. You know, the state people have come here, FEMA's come here, Westchester County and Rockland have come up to look at our building and see how we did it, because they all acknowledged, and I'm pretty proud of this, that we did the best.
What, in your opinion, and we've all experienced depression, not being able to sleep at night. There's a lot of things that go with serving overseas. What's the best advice to people watching this right now that have that? Maybe they might be a dispatcher downstairs. They might be an ambulance EMT that have responded to a number of calls that are having problems. What's the best advice for them?
Absolutely. My best advice would be talk to somebody. But you got to talk to somebody who understands, right? So I ended up going to the regimental psychologist, you know, to deal with the Roberts Ridge shoot down, and then later on, you know, when the wife was a problem, and they were the ones that turned me on to Al-Anon, and it felt good to talk about it. Like you asked me this years ago. You're like, "Hey, do you have PTSD?" And I was like, "Maybe a little. I don't know. Nothing that's so obvious that I could say yes." But you know, I don't like being in crowds too much if I don't have control, that kind of thing. But talk to somebody, you know. And but like I said, they got to be somebody that can relate to what you're saying. So you know, if it's an EMS guy who's just dealt with a mass casualty event, you know, you got to talk to somebody who understands those feelings, you know. But you got to talk about it.
I like the 311 that it's confidential and they'll get you to help. So they might not be the right person to talk to, but they'll get you that right person.
They'll know who to get you to. Yeah.
And I definitely think that the more people like you that can talk about successes and failures in life, and at the same time saying we all need help. We all need to be able to in order to get through these things. Right. They're not normal events. Yeah. So. Alan, it's been great talking to you. And I know this is the longest podcast we have, but I think it's good material, and I think it's good for people to watch us. You know, everyday walk of life people with experiences. You've been all over the world, been part of some exciting missions, and suffered, but gotten through. You can get Alan Mack's book. We're going to have a link on it. You could also go to alanmack.com, right?
AlanCmack.com.
AlanCmack.com. Right. Very easily spelled, one L.
Yes.
And the letter C, Charlie,
yeah.
M-A-C-K.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us today.